In January, there was the special legislative session on education, and it focused a lot on K through 12 education, which included the state's application for a large federal education grant. The first to the top legislation created several changes in our K through 12 system. Tell us a little bit about why you voted against that bill.
Well, once again, it was the federal government telling us you have to plug in order to get this stimulus money, you have to pass a certain law. And, you know, if this was good policy, we should have passed it a long time ago. The legislation, however, did not have any shalls in it. It was all mays, which meant you may or may not do it. We'll see how much is followed through on that, especially if we don't get the stimulus money. I had some real questions about the evaluation of teachers. In talking with a lot of teachers, if you have a room full of special ed children versus, you know, a classroom of really smart kids, is it fair to include their test grades in any of the evaluations? So I had some real questions about that, and I think, you know, we'll see in the future what comes of that. There were provisions to close down schools. We've had that in the law for a long time now in the state of Tennessee, and they've never closed down a school because of test grades. And I asked the commissioner when we were talking about the new education bill, if you close down a school, what are you going to do with those children? In our county, we don't have enough school buildings right now. And he said, well, we could have a private agency come in and manage those schools. There are a lot of questions about that and what that agency, you know, might allow to be taught in those schools, you know. And so there were a lot of concerns about that bill.
Are there any things in the K through 12 legislation that was passed that you think are good for our K through 12 schools?
Well, I think we need a lot of guidelines for our schools. We need, you know, to push them to be the best that they can be. And I think it does it to some extent, but I think more thought should have been put into it. In 1 week, we were asked to address something that would have normally taken a whole session, that would have taken months and months. So I feel like we really flew through that in a hurry.
Yeah. Well, the special session also dealt with changes to higher education. Among the changes was the way that we fund higher education with a focus on graduation rates rather than enrollment. Another provision called for a more seamless system for the transfer of coursework from one college to another. What is your take on this higher education legislation?
The one good thing about the higher education legislation is that it's easier to transfer credits from one institution to another. Also, there's always been a lot of complaints about all the remedial courses that were having to be taught in our 4-year universities. Now the 2-year universities our 2-year colleges will have to teach those. There are a lot of good things in that. It was not tied to any stimulus money. They just used it as an opportunity to try to correct some things and help improve the graduation rates, as you said.
Do you think that that's an important part, to focus on the graduation rates rather than the enrollment rates, making sure that people are actually getting all the way through somewhere?
I think so. One of the big complaints that we get with the lottery money and the scholarships is that people get in and there are lots of kids that get the scholarship, and then they're not the ones that really stay in school. Many of them drop out, they don't finish. So maybe these changes in the higher education guidelines will make sure that many of those stay in school.
Do you think that our tight state budget is going to mean automatic tuition increases for students here at Volunteer State and other higher education facilities?
I don't know, it seems like we've had automatic increases for a long time now, ever since the income tax debate. So, you know, I would never guess what's going to happen with that.
Any thoughts on trying to hold down the costs for our students?
You know, in times like these, I think everybody's got to manage like they do in their home. You just spend what you have and make the necessary cuts to get by.
Well, let's change the topic here and talk a little bit about some other things that have been passions of yours in the legislature. Whenever you're here, we've spent some time talking about keeping people safe on the roads. We're making some progress in reducing the problems of drinking and driving. Recently, an important piece of legislation that you co-sponsored or sponsored was dealing with ignition interlocks, and that has passed the Judiciary Committee. Can you tell us how this would work?
Yes, that's something that Representative Shipley, one of our new representatives, worked on all summer, meeting with the Department of Safety, with mental health, with a lot of different agencies to make sure that we worked out a bill that would work, where we took care of the indigent. That's always been the thing that kills a bill. It's what about these people that can't afford to put an ignition interlock on their car. Right. He worked out a lot of the details, and so it's really made it easy for me to try to get that through. We had to get the fiscal note off. That was done by charging fees to the people that have to use the interlock devices. What the bill would do now would anyone that registers .15 and above would get an ignition interlock put on their car. Those are the upper limits. Those are like twice the limit of .08 at which you're legally drunk. And so these are your real problem drivers. These are people that they've drank so much. We had an expert testify that their brains are swollen, you know, they don't have good judgment. And to put an ignition interlock on their car will really help save lives. The Department of Safety said 200 to 300 lives per year would be saved if we would just pass this. And one day when we had the bill in committee, we actually had a volunteer from the hallways. He heard that we were going to be hearing the bill, came in, and he said, an ignition interlock saved my life. I had a really, really bad problem. And they put an ignition interlock on my car, and it actually saved my life. I got away from the alcohol, and I'm doing great today. So, you know, it's an instrument. Now, the interesting part of this bill, what has evolved is, part of this bill would make .08. If you're arrested and you register .08 blood alcohol, or on the breathalyzer rather, you could choose to have an ignition interlock put on your car. And instead of having a license, a restricted license that the judges can now permit someone to have, they could choose to have the interlock, and it would free them up for an interlock license, which means they could drive anywhere as long as they blew into that instrument, made sure they had no alcohol on their breath, and it frees them up to not only go to school and work, but anywhere they needed to go. So perhaps that's going to be an incentive to make some of our drivers that are driving drunk a lot choose the ignition interlock and help them get over their problem.
Do you have any notion what the cost is to install something like that in a car?
The cost to install is going to be around $75 to $100, and then it's going to cost around $35, $40 a month. They told us maybe $3.50, you know, a day or something. We've heard a lot of figures. They did actually put some caps in the bill so that we don't have someone taking advantage of it, that, you know, it'll just get to the cost of what it is right now. Most people don't understand that judges in Tennessee can order interlocks right now. And there are about 3 or 4 companies that are already doing business all over the state of Tennessee. We think this bill will bring in more competition so that it'll bring the prices down for these devices. And we think the judges, well, they'll have to start using them more. Right now they don't have to. But we think it's going to make our roads safer.
And where exactly does this bill stand in the Senate?
Right now it's in the Finance Committee. It's in the Budget Sub in the House. There's no cost to the state, but it had to go there because there are some fees included in the bill that will be charged to the offender that will go to the different departments, so it had to go through the finance area.
A House subcommittee has effectively killed the container law, the open container law, or what's become known as the Pass the Bottle bill for this year's session. This is one of those bills that seems to make so much sense, and yet it gets killed year after year. What is the deal with that?
Well, my bill's still actually alive, but since they've killed one of them, you know that the other one's not going to survive. And this has happened year after year. And we stand to gain, I say gain, to use highway funds in a different way if we were to pass a decent law. Right now, there's $16 million in highway funds that we're having to spend on. You see the advertisements on the Titans games from the Governor's Highway Traffic Safety Office on drunk driving. You see the local police departments and some of the advertising and things that they do. If we were to pass the bottle bill that were within the federal guidelines of what we are supposed to do, that would free that money up for us to actually put pavement down on our roads, which is badly needed right now.